Okay, our next topic is the root hair cell. Now to proceed, the first thing that we need to know, again, like we did in red blood cell, is the labeling of the root hair cell. Okay, so we know that this is a plant cell. Okay, and there are certain things that are different in this particular cell, which we'll talk about. So let's start. Let me change the color of it. I think red should do. Okay, so let's start off with labeling the nucleus. Okay, so that's the nucleus. And then, of course, this granular thing that you can see is the cytoplasm. And then this large central vacuole. And then you can see lots of these organelles. All of them are mitochondria. Remember, the root hair cell needs a lot of mitochondria. And the reason for that is that it has to release a lot of energy, which of course is coming from the process of respiration which happens inside the mitochondria. Now, the distinguishing feature that we need to understand about the root hair cell is this part of the root hair cell. So remember, this entire cell is known as the root hair cell, and this particular portion that I've labeled with a bracket is known as the root hair itself. Okay, now there are some misconceptions that students usually have in the exam when they attempt the question. I'll give you the number of incorrect names that they coin for root hair, which is the correct word. Root hair is the correct word for this extension that you can see. So the wrong choices of words, so let me change that ink color for you. Okay, so the wrong choices of word would be villi. I don't know why some students go on to think that this root hair is the villi. Hair-like projection, that's also incorrect, or simply hair. No, that's also incorrect. Okay, so the correct word, remember, for this projection is the root hair itself. Okay, now there's one thing that you must have been noticing, that we're talking about plant cells, but there's one thing that is missing in this particular cell, and that is the chloroplast. Okay, so you can see that the chloroplast is missing, and the reason why the chloroplast is missing, because the root hair cell, remember, although it's part of the plant cell, but since it is underground, it does not receive sunlight, so therefore it can't photosynthesize. So remember, this is one of the few cells of plants that do not photosynthesize. Okay, you have to remember this point. This is very important, that the root hair cell does not have a chloroplast. Now, the next thing that we need to be very clear about before we jump onto the structure and function, and the relation of the function and the structure, is that where exactly do we find the root hair cells? Now, before coming to this picture that you can see on the display screen, I mean, simply speaking, if I were to talk about a simple plant cell, a simple plant, it would look something like this. You have the roots, you have the stem, and then you have the lovely leaf. Yeah, isn't that the case? But of course, the leaf will not be red. That's just my ink. But this is generally how a plant looks like. Okay? And if I were to magnify this particular portion of the root, it would appear something like this that you can see on the screen. Okay? So we're trying to understand where exactly is the root hair cell located in the plant. So you can see at the boundary of this particular part of the root, you can see these projections. Yes, this part. So remember, this particular part is the root hair of the entire root hair cell. Okay, so literally the root hair cells, they surround the outer boundary and layer of the roots themselves. Okay, and these quote-unquote finger-like things, you don't have to use this word in the exam, that you can see are known as the root hairs of the root hair cell. RHC is the abbreviation for root hair cell, which of course you're not supposed to use. I'm just using to save time. Okay. Now the next picture is a photomicrograph of the root, and you can see that in this particular picture. Let me highlight one entire root hair cell. Okay. So you can see this entire thing is the root hair cell. So, and this particular portion is just the root hair, as they've labeled here in this diagram. Okay, so I don't want you to be confused between the root hair cell and the root hair itself. They're two different things. Root hair is part of the root hair cell. Okay, I hope that clarifies where exactly in the plant do we find the root hair cell. Now let's come to the main part of the root hair cell itself. Now remember, as far as the function of the root hair cell is concerned, the function, now I want you to pause the video and think about the function of the root hair cell. If you've ever come across in grade 8 science or lower grade sciences, what exactly is the function of a root hair cell? It's a specialized cell, which of course means it has to perform a special function. Remember, the function of the root hair cell is absorption of two things. Number one is water, and number two is mineral salts. Okay, like nitrates and nitrites and all of that stuff. And remember, the process by which the root hair cell will absorb water is osmosis. Inshallah, we will discuss what exactly osmosis means in the next topic to come. And the mineral salts, they are absorbed majority of the times by a process known as active transport, which of course requires energy. Again, which we'll talk about, inshallah, when we do topic number 2. Alright, so that's the function of the root hair cell. I want you to remember this. Now again, coming to a typical exam style question, for these specialized cells, we have to describe the structure of the root hair cell in relation to its function. Okay, so I've listed 5 of the structural features, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for you. Let's quickly go through them one by one. And again, on the right hand side you have a diagram of a root hair cell. So you can see the cell wall. Again, there's one thing that I would like to mention, which I although have mentioned previously, but just to reiterate the point. So you can see the cell wall is this thick portion, yes. Okay, and just inside of this thick portion is the cell membrane. Okay, so remember, if you in the exam, if you're asked to label the root hair cell, make sure that you're crystal clear. Excuse me, on this part. And then you can see the central vacuole, and you can see the root hair. Remember, this is the root hair, not the hair, not the villi, as some students would insist. And this entire thing is the root hair cell. Now, point number 1. The first structural feature that we are concerned about is the root hairs in the root hair cell enlarges the surface area. So this is something similar to the red blood cell. So, you know, basically this projection, the root hair, it increases the surface area to volume ratio, and we'll see what effect does this have on the function. How does it facilitate this particular function that we've just alluded to, right? That is absorption of water and mineral salts. Point number 2, the cell membrane has protein carriers. We'll see to that, how does that affect the function or aid the function. Point number 3, there are many mitochondria. If you remember the picture I showed you previously, this picture, this picture. So remember we said there are a lot of mitochondria, although there are only few shown in this diagram, but you know, the root hair, it usually has, root hair cell, has a lot of mitochondria, okay? And we'll see to that, how does that affect the function. And then they have thin cell wall, as opposed to relatively thick cell walls that usually plant cells have. Unlike the other plant cells, this particular plant cell has thinner cell wall. Okay, so the root hair has thin cell wall. We'll see to that, how does that aid in the function. And point number 5, the cell vacuole has high concentration of solutes. This is also a very important point we'll talk about. Okay, now let's see how do all of these 5 points, they relate to the function. Now, the first point, the very fact that the root hair increases the surface area, it basically maximizes the absorption of water, okay? Which otherwise, if the surface area would not have been enlarged, the water absorption would not have been that maximized, okay? Again, this is something similar that we talked about in the red blood cell. Point number 2, cell membrane has protein carriers, okay? And what do those protein carriers do is that they basically aid in active transport, which again, we'll talk about in detail in topic number 2. But which simply means that it's basically a movement of substances across the cell which requires energy. And of course, for that, we need protein carriers which are present in a living cell membrane. Point number 3, many mitochondria. Again, let's ask this question. How does the fact that this root hair cell having many mitochondria help in the function of the absorption of water and mineral salts? Well, the answer is that the more the number of mitochondria, the more respiration, and therefore the more the energy is released, and therefore easier active transport. Alright, thin cell wall. Now, having thin cell wall, how does that help in the function? Well, the answer is that the distance for diffusion is shorter, okay? And then last but not the least, cell vacuole has high concentration of solutes. Now, the last point is something that we will do in detail in topic number 2 in osmosis, but let me quickly tell you, the root hair cell, for example, because of its vacuole, has lower water potential as compared to the outside, which has a lot more water potential, okay? So basically what will happen is the water will move from the region of its higher concentration to the region of its lower concentration across the partially permeable cell membrane, okay? So basically, the very fact that the cell vacuole has high concentration of solutes would basically facilitate this process of osmosis. Okay, again, this is just, make sure that when we do topic number 2, you come back to this video. This will make more sense. Okay, so this finishes the topic of root hair cell. Now, coming to the next topic, which is the xylem tissue. Now, the next thing that we are talking about is not a specialized cell, but it's a specialized tissue. Now, what's the difference between a cell and a tissue? We'll talk about in this very topic. That's the last topic to come. So basically, xylem and phloem, these are two vessels in plants that are known as vascular bundles. Excuse me, which are basically responsible for transportation of water and food respectively. But of course, that detail is in plant nutrition. What we're concerned about here is basically the structure and function of the xylem vessel. So basically you can see that this is a simple vessel, but something that is interesting is this thing that you can see within the xylem vessel, which is the white spiral-like thing. Okay, you call that thing as lignin. It's a dead material which is deposited within the xylem vessel, which basically gives mechanical support to the xylem vessel. Now, the picture on the right-hand side is a real photomicrograph, and these red things, they basically depict the way lignin is deposited in different ways in the xylem vessel. So you can see that in this particular, the second particular diagram, you can see that there are only rings of lignin, okay? Whereas in this particular diagram, you can literally see the lignin deposited in the spiral fashion, okay? So that's the first way lignin is deposited. That's the second way. And that's the third way that you can see, in which all within the inner boundary you can see the lignin deposited, except for few spaces that are left, okay? So these are three different styles or ways, if you like, in which the lignin is deposited within the xylem vessel. Okay. Now, there are two functions of xylem vessels that we need to remember, and then we'll come to that next topic, which is how do we relate this function with the existing structure. Now, the first function is very simple, which is transportation of water and mineral salts. Okay, of course, the mineral salts are within the water. And the second function of xylem is it gives strength and support to the plant because of the lignin. Now, you know, if this lignin was not deposited within this vessel would not have been that strong. And that's the very reason why another way to put the second point is that it gives mechanical support to the plant. Okay, that's another way you can put the second point. So remember, the two functions of xylem vessels are number one, transportation of water and mineral salts, and number two, giving strength and mechanical support. And that's because of lignin, okay, which is a dead material, of course. Now, there are a few points that we need to remember, and now once we've understood the function of xylem vessel, let's try and relate the structure with the function. Okay, now quickly pause the video and recall the function of the xylem vessels, which are number one, transportation of water and mineral salts, number two, giving mechanical support to the plant. Now, coming to the very first point, xylem is a long, continuous tube. Okay, now the words that you can see in the colored form are basically key or hit words that the examiner will look for and give you marks. So make sure that whenever you're in the process of learning this, you have to literally memorize all of these keywords. Okay, so the first point that you can see is it says xylem is like a long continuous tube. Okay, starting from roots, then continues in the stem up to the leaf. Point number two. There are no cross walls. Now, what exactly do I mean when I say that there are no cross walls? Well, what that simply means is, you know, once upon a time, xylem was a group of cells lying on top of one another, okay? And, you know, what happened was, those cells, they lost their cross walls, as in the point where one cell met the other. So basically, if the xylem vessel was something like this, okay? And these walls of the cell would basically hinder the flow within the xylem vessel. So what happened was that over the period of time when the xylem developed, the xylem lost all of its cross walls. So basically that made it a hollow tube. Okay, and that's, I think, our next point. Yes, it is a hollow tube, meaning that it has no protoplasm, no cytoplasm, no nucleus, no nothing. Remember, once upon a time, xylem vessel was a group of cells, one on top of one another, and it went through a process of evolution, basically specialization, I apologize, therefore forming xylem vessel. Point number four, cells are joined end to end. Again, when we're seeing a xylem vessel, we literally don't see the cells being joined end to end, but that's how it went through the process of specialization. Okay, so cells are joined end to end. Next point, xylem vessels themselves are very narrow and thin. Okay, now you have to remember this. I hope you've seen different sizes of different straws you have for different packets of juice. I mean, I'm sure everybody has seen the McDonald's straw. It's quite thick. It's not thin as compared to a normal packet of juice, which has a very thin straw. So remember, xylem vessels are very thin and narrow. And that facilitates in the function because the narrower the vessel, the more the capillarity, which simply means, okay, so let me give you this example, okay? So you can see my stylus pen cover, it's a bit thicker, and you can see my stylus pen, well, it's relatively thin. Now, if I have a glass full of water, and I equally put both of them down, imagine both of them were straws, okay, this one being thicker and this one being thinner. Now, if I were to put dip both of them down for equal distance within the glass, okay, this particular this particular straw, which is thinner, the water level would rise more as compared to this one. This phenomena of water rising more in thin vessels is known as capillarity. Okay, so this is how it helps in the function of the xylem. Point number 6. It has lignified internal walls, which simply means that the internal walls are, so as we saw in the previous diagram, you saw that there were different ways in which lignin was deposited. So in some case it was spiral, in some cases it was just ring-shaped, and the other was the pitted one. Okay, so they have lignified internal walls, pitted, circular, and spiral. These are the 3 shapes. And the next point is lignin is thickly deposited on the internal walls. So remember, lignin is not just like the jam or the butter you would put on your bread, but literally it's very thickly deposited. Despite of the fact that the xylem vessels themselves are very thin, but relative to their thinness, the lignin that's deposited is very thick. Okay, of course, which adds to the mechanical strength of the xylem. And last but not the least, a very important point that students often forget: lignin is a dead material. It's not living, it's dead. Okay. Now this is a good picture that basically explains, that shows you the cross section, and then it shows you the side longitudinal section of how xylem vessels look like. So you can see these are empty tubes. So basically this diagram is only depicting lignin through the thickness that you can see. Okay, that's basically lignin, and all of the internal space you can see is hollow. Okay, which basically would facilitate the movement of water and mineral ions. Okay, and this is the cross section. You can see that's the hollow, that's the xylem vessel that I'm ticking on, and this thick material that I'm shading. All of this is deposits of lignin. Okay, as you can see no cytoplasm, is hollow, and all of these are xylem vessels. Okay, the last topic that we need to touch on with xylem is the importance of lignin. Okay. Number 1, it strengthens the xylem vessel, of course, which the substitute word that we used was that it basically gives mechanical support. Okay. Point number 2, it prevents collapse of xylem. I mean, imagine a plant, think about it. You can literally see plants standing upright. So that uprightness is coming from the mechanical support that is being provided from the lignin itself. Okay, otherwise, I mean, it would be floppy. The plants would literally not be the posture that you can see they are. That's because of the lignin deposited within the xylem. So it prevents the collapse. Point number 3, it prevents tearing of plants, keeps them upright. I mean, imagine a strong wind blowing. You can still see that the plants, the leaves, they stay in their place, as in they don't tear apart. The very fact that the plants, they don't tear apart is again because of the fact that it has lignin and it keeps the leaf spread. Okay, so these are the 4 points that we need to remember as far as the importance of lignin is concerned. So that finishes our topic of xylem vessels. Coming to the next topic, and that's the last topic. Excuse me for that, and that is basically levels of organization. Okay, levels of organization. What that simply means is, we've talked about cells. Okay, we've seen how different cells, they are specialized for different functions, and the common individual organelles, they have their individual functions, like the nucleus, like the mitochondria, and so on and so forth. Now, cells, they're not there in isolation. They work together. Okay, so cells, most of the cells, they combine to form something that we'll talk about, and that's tissues. And then tissues, they combine to form organs. Organs, and then you have the organ system, which I'll allude to in a moment. But in the picture you can see they've tried to define a tissue. A tissue is a group. Okay, so look at this blue box, please. A tissue is a group of cells of similar structure that perform a shared function. Now this is very important. So a collection of cells that have a similar structure, they will form a tissue. Now, on the diagram on the left-hand side is, of course, something that is not being covered in detail in topic number 1, but this is the cross-section of a leaf. This is a cross-section of a leaf, okay? And you can see different tissues. So the first, the upper tissue is the upper epidermal tissue. And you can see, so let me label these cells. 1, 2, 3. Of course, this is not made up of 3 cells, but the picture is depicting only 3 cells. Okay, that's the 4th cell. So you can see these 4 epidermal cells, okay, as they call them. They combine together to perform a particular function, which is, of course, protection and other functions, which we're not alluding to here. But they form what we call as the upper epidermal tissue. We don't call them as, excuse me, upper epidermal cells. We call them as tissues, okay? And similarly, you have the palisade mesophyll tissue. Again, you can see all of these cells. They're together and they're performing a particular function. Similarly, you can see these cells. They're there together. They perform a particular function. So a tissue is a group of cells of similar structure that perform a shared function. Now, again, giving you examples, we've got nervous tissue, we've got muscle tissue. Now, the next progression in level of organization is the organs itself. So I'm sure everybody is aware of different organs that we have in our body, okay? You have the heart, you have the lungs, you have the liver, you have the stomach, you have the brain, you have the kidneys. Now, the tissues, a group of tissues, when they work together to perform a particular function, that's known as an organ. Okay, the definition sounds quite similar, but the idea is the same, okay? And then, you have different organs. Now, this is a very good diagram in which you can see different systems. So you can see the lymphatic system, the digestive system, the reproductive system, the skeletal system, and the endocrine system. And then the list goes on, the respiratory system, excretory system, muscular, nervous, and circulatory system. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that different organs, they work in coordination to perform a particular function. Okay, so let's read the definition. An organ system is a group of organs that coordinate to perform related functions. Okay, so I mean, let's talk about digestive system. You have stomach, you have the large intestine, you have the small intestine. So you see all of those organs are related and performing a particular function. Similarly, if we're talking about excretory system, we know we have the kidneys, we have the bladder, and so on and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is what we call as the organ system. And then, of course, at the end of the organ system, we have the organism itself. So again, we started off with the cell, and then you have the tissue, and then you have the organ. They've just given one example. So you have a muscle cell, for example, heart muscle cell, and then you have heart muscle tissues, and the organ is the heart itself, and then you have the circulatory system. Okay, I've summarized the definitions for you, so you can have a look. And I strongly suggest that you take notes for these definitions and you remember them. So again, this picture is depicting the same phenomena of levels of organization in a different way. And then this is a typical example of levels of organizations in plants. So you have the cells, and then you have different tissues that I alluded to earlier. That's in this picture of the leaf. And then you have the leaf, which is the organ itself. And then you have the organism, the entire plant, the roots, the stem, the leaves, the flower. Okay, so that ends our last topic of cells and the topic itself. I hope and pray you understood this topic well. If you still think there's any confusion, I would strongly suggest you refer back to my notes and refer back to the videos where required. Okay, now, the next thing that we're going to do in this particular is the exam style question, okay, for this first topic. So let's quickly jump onto the exam style questions. Okay, I'm going to use another ink. I think maybe, yeah, this should do. Green ink should do. Good. Okay, So the photograph, let's talk about question number 1. I have some MCQs and then I have some theory questions. I think question is just one question. Okay, the photograph shows some human cells, okay, under the microscope. Okay, that's a good diagram, labeled QP. What are structures P and Q? Okay, so whenever we are talking about exam style questions, remember it is very important to read the question carefully. So the photograph shows some human cells, okay, which means that if he's talking about human cells, that means it's an animal cell, okay, and it's not a plant cell. Okay, all right. So P, of course, is something in the middle. So what do you think is P? Yeah, that's exactly cytoplasm. And Q is the outer boundary. So one may think that this is either cell membrane or cell wall. How do we know? Well, so that's the hint in the question. Since the question says that the photograph shows some human cells, so this has to be the cell membrane. Okay, so the answer to this question would be P is cytoplasm and Q is cell membrane. A is the correct answer. Question number 2. Xylem is an example of A, a cell, B, a tissue, C, an organ, D, an organ system. Okay, so again, this question is from levels of organization. So xylem, of course, is not a cell. Neither is it an organ or an organ system. That was just a factual question. It's basically a tissue. Okay, question number 3. The diagram shows cells from the epidermis of a leaf. Okay, leaf, what that means is we're talking about plant cells here. Okay, we're talking about plant cells here. It says in the question, which parts are partially permeable? Okay, so of course we've learned different words for this, either semi-permeable or partially permeable. So basically he is alluding to the cell membrane. Okay, because we know that's the thing that's basically partially permeable membrane in a plant cell. Now, let's first identify all of these PQRS for us. So S is the cell membrane. Why did I say that's the cell membrane? Because you can see it's basically on the inner side. And then the R is the cell. What do you think is R? Is it the cell wall or is it the cell membrane? Think about it. It's basically the boundary that touches both of the cells. So basically that is the cell wall itself. Q, again, is the cell wall of the middle cell that we can see, again. And then P. What is P? I haven't talked about the word in our basically this topic that we've done. We call this as tonoplast. Now, remember, tonoplast is a membrane that surrounds the vacuole, and it is similar in structure to the cell membrane. Okay, so which parts are partially permeable? S, and yes, you are right, tonoplast is similar. So the answer is P and S, which is D. Alright, question number 4. The diagram shows some animal cells as seen under the microscope. What will be present at X? Okay, so let's find some hints in the question. The diagram shows some animal cells. Okay, so we're not talking about plant cells. Okay, so plant cells are ruled out, which means that the cell wall is also ruled out. Okay, so what will be present at X? Of course, we know it will be cell membrane. Okay, but the question, the options are quite interesting. One cell membrane, well, if it were to be this particular portion, then I would say that this is one cell membrane, but this particular portion is depicting how many cell membranes? The cell membrane of this cell, cell number 1, and the cell membrane of this cell that I've labeled as cell 2. So let's rule out the options. One cell wall, well, we're not talking about plant cells here. We're talking about animal cells, as we alluded to earlier. So cell walls is not a good option. And again, also not one cell membrane. Okay, and what so we're ruling out cell wall, B and D, and then we're ruling out one cell membrane also because we're talking about these two cells. Okay, so these are two cell membranes, so the answer is C. Okay, question number 5. Plant cells are often green, but animal cells are not usually green. Okay, which structures in plant cells make them green? Well, the cell wall is not green. Okay, yes, the chloroplast is green. Why? Because it has a chemical which is known as chlorophyll. Okay, which is green, which is responsible, we know, for the process of photosynthesis. So the answer is B. Alright, so let's come to the last theory type question, exam style question. Figure 4.1 shows a root hair cell. Name the features labeled A, B, and C. Okay, so A, B, and C. Pause the video and try this for yourself. A is the cell wall. B is the nucleus. C is the vacuole. Alright, so you get all of them 3, which means all of them correct, which means you get 3 marks. Okay. Write your answers on figure 4.1. Okay, we've done that already. A2, feature A. Okay, what is feature A? Okay, cell wall. Feature A is made of cellulose. So let me write down cell wall here for myself so that to avoid confusion. Feature A is made of cellulose. What is cellulose made from? Okay, cellulose is made from carbohydrates. Remember this. When we do animal nutrition, we'll talk about classes of food. Of course, in the exam, you get questions that are mixed from other topics also. You're not expected to know this if you've only done topic number 1, but that's the answer, remember. State 2 functions of root hair cells. So you remember we talked about them already in the lesson. The first function is absorption of water, and the second function is absorption of mineral salts. Now, I would strongly encourage, although the answer does satisfy the requirement of the question, but I would strongly suggest that whenever you are writing in the exam, you go a bit beyond, as in, not to say that you go beyond the requirement of the question, but a good scripted answer would be absorption of water by osmosis. Okay. And absorption of mineral salts by active transport. Okay, so you get 2 marks for this. Okay. Describe how a root hair cell is adapted for its function. It's just for 1 mark. Okay, so you only need to describe one feature, how basically it enables it's adapted for its function. So we'll say that the root hair increases the surface area for maximum absorption of water. Okay, so that's one function. We get 1 mark here. Okay, and the last part of this question is figure 4.2 shows a palisade mesophyll cell. Okay, and then the cell in figure 4.2 contains structures which are not present in root hairs. State the name of these structures and explain their function. Now, remember, we talked about the fact that if we're talking about a plant cell, a plant basically has 3 major things. It has the organs above, that's the leaf, that's the stem, and all of these that you can see underground are the roots. Now, remember, the sunlight is only coming directly to the leaf and the stem. The root hairs, no sunlight is reaching the root hairs, so therefore they don't photosynthesize. So the the fact that they don't photosynthesize means that they do not need the structures that are known as chloroplasts. Okay, so state the name of these structures and explain their function. Let me read the question again. The cell in figure 4.2 contains structures which are not present in root hair cells. State the name of these structures and explain their function. So by stating the name chloroplasts, you get 1 mark. Okay, by the way, a wrong choice would be to say chlorophyll. Pause the video and think about this. Why is this incorrect? Because chlorophyll is not a structure. It's not a structure. It's a chemical present within the structure of chloroplasts. So remember, when I did this topic, I clarified that you have to differentiate between both. So chloroplasts and their function is, so the next point that you will write is their function is they play a role in photosynthesis. Okay, and how does that happen? They have a chemical which is known as chlorophyll, and chlorophyll traps light energy and converts it into chemical energy. Okay, so that gives you the rest of the mark. This is also a marking point, this is also a marking point, and this is also a marking point. So technically you get full score, 10 out of 10. I hope you enjoyed the exam style question. That ends our topic number 1, practice exam style questions. Thank you for watching.